So to start us off, Christian, can you introduce yourself and give us a little educational background on yourself and your resume, so to speak, when it comes to the mafia and mob historian stuff?
Sure. My name is Christian Cipollini, and I'm an organized crime historian and journalist, also, I guess, filmmaker. Um, I started with a fascination in organized crime, how it sort of fit into culture or the subculture when I was like 20 years old. And I was always kind of a good writer, but sucked at everything else. So it took like a decade or more for it to all come together. And I ended up writing my first book in 2011. It came out in 2012, and I've had a couple more books under my belt since then. But yeah, that's pretty much the very short version. I've ever since I was a kid, I've had a fascination with, I don't know, I guess you could say, the darker corners of humanity, I suppose. So it all culminated later in life. I was a late bloomer, if that answers the question.
Right. Yeah, that does. Okay, so to start us off, can you talk about the differences and the similarities between the mob and the mafia?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, as a historian, I admit that I'm kind of a stickler for some black and white elements of history and distinction. I'm not a big label or category guy, but as a historian, you kind of have to have these parameters. So people, myself included, back in the day, you interchange the word mob with mafia, and I like to make the distinction. The mafia, especially if we're talking about the original mafia, the Italian Sicilian version, is a part of the broader term of mob. What is a mob organization? Could be the Jewish mob, the Irish mob, African American mob, the Italian mob, the Mexican mob. So the word mafia is now loosely thrown around everywhere, as is the word mob. So when you're talking about my specific area of like Depression era American mobsters, the mob was the broad umbrella which encompassed the Jewish, Italian, and to a lesser degree the Irish under it. So you have segments. If that kind of puts it in perspective or makes sense, it's the words aren't synonymous, and they're thrown around a lot. But as a historian, yeah, I'm a stickler for it. Mafia specifically is a group. In my case, it was, you're talking about the Sicilian Italian, mafia. What worked with the Jewish mobsters and other ethnic groups, and that was considered the mob.
All right, that's a good introduction and a good rundown. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to be, or you had to be Italian to be in the mafia. But as a mobster, you could be any race or religion, whatever. You would just be a quote unquote associate. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, generally speaking, that's exactly right. You nailed it. A lot of people were associated with, even some to pretty high levels, but the Italian Sicilian element of it, at least back in the 19th and 20th century, there was probably more. I don't know. They were probably more sticklers for tradition. So you have to have a certain percentage of Italian or some, in some cases, straight up Sicilian descent, and they had their ways to track your family lineage. But as time goes on, like anything, there's less of that. Like you didn't have to be a full blooded Dago coming on the boat to be in the mafia as time went on. And I can say Dago because I am one. So there.
Right. Um, so Can you break down the five families in New York? You don't have to spend a whole lot of time. Maybe just give
Sure.
like the biggest cast of characters when it came to the families, like the who was in power the longest, and the people who got assassinated, the snitches who were responsible for putting most away, so on and so forth.
Well, that like any high political drama, the underworld was no different, and you had a lot of backstabbing. It's whoever's on top. I don't care if you're talking about Julius Caesar or Genghis Khan. It's the same in the mob. Somebody wants your job or wants to take over your family. So, real short, what are these five families? Actually, there were more, and they were sort of became more of a solidarity kind of thing in 1931. It was credited to Lucky Luciano, which some people may be familiar with the name. It wasn't just him, but his group of what they were calling progressive mobsters. They were Americanized Italian and Jewish guys that saw the old school way of warring between mafia families in the United States as something that's old school Italy, and they really didn't see that as being economically beneficial. So ultimately, there were coups and they assassinated or had assassinated a lot of these old school mobsters. And by the end of 1931, you had what we kind of now refer to as the five families. And again, there were more than that, but that was the five main ones in New York City. Now, on that note, I should point out something I learned from one of my mentors a long time ago is the first mentions of mafia in the United States was actually in New Orleans, and it can be pinpointed to around the turn of the from 19th 20th century is when it became newsworthy, and it was of all places not New York, it was New Orleans. But these warring factions were finally brought, I don't know, under the same umbrella. So Chicago, Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, eventually Los Angeles, all Kansas City, all these places that had a family, as they call it, were sort of brought under one unified, dare I say, unified umbrella. Of course, chaos was bound to come, as you were alluding to. It didn't take long for other would be up and coming mob bosses to decide to whack, the boss of whatever family. That went on a lot.
So I'm familiar with the I don't know how to say the exact word, but it's the is it Genovese family?
Genovese family.
And what are the other four family names?
Okay, so the interesting thing about that is the family names, most of them changed sometimes several times before they became what we now knew from 1970s on. And I'm not going to go through the whole list of what they started at in 1931, but Luciano even had his own family, and that one became the Genovese family after Luciano was exiled back to Italy, and his second in command was a power hungry maniac who ended up changing the family name to Genovese. So there was currently it's Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, the Colombo, and wait, who did I forget here? Um, see, some before 1970, there was like the Profaci family, which that changed names. None of them have really changed since the 1970s. We still, I don't know, refer to them that way.
Hmm.
But
So
I don't know. I should point out too though, when I get asked like, okay, is the mafia still active? Are these families still in power? The short answer is I think they're always going to be there. It's like part of the Americana. But is it the same as it was even in the 1980s during the Gotti era? Or no, definitely not. There's too many other players on the world stage. But or is there always going to be a Lucchese and a Gambino and a Genovese? Yeah, there will probably.
You know, before Tony Montana passed away, I asked him about the mafia and the mob in the 21st century, and he was like, you know, they're all doing legal things. They're running like liquor stores and weed dispensaries and stuff like that, which makes sense because I guess they can tax them. I guess it's still illegal, but legal in a sense because it's a legal business, right? But they're still illegally doing things probably under the table.
Sure, there's all it's anyone who enters into particularly organized crime, you have to be an opportunist to be that. Whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, it's opportunism, and they will always find something and survive. And when it comes to like narco trafficking, we have evidence even just from a few years ago that the American Italian mob and the Sicilians and the Sinaloans were kind of doing some deals together. So it's about survival, but we're in the 21st century. It's probably more about online scams, still gambling to some extent, even though that's really becoming legalized. And yeah, Andrew, interesting you brought up weed dispensaries. I said this when they made it legal, and I'm glad they did, just because I think it was ridiculous that that drug is even on the schedule. But I had said, don't think the mob or the underworld's going to go away, because when the government taxes and it's very expensive to run a legal business, there's always going to be what I call Eddie on the corner, who's going to give it to you cheaper because he's doing it illegally or getting his supply line from someone illegal. Like, you can't just stamp it out, especially when it's taxed out the ass, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. So when I was friends with Tony Montana, he would always joke and be like, the Chicago mob was organized crime and the mafia was disorganized crime. Is there
Hmm.
any like truth to that?
It depends on who you ask. This is one of those things. It's like talking about politics. It's in whatever lens somebody has on, whether they were on the inside, the outside, good guy, bad guy, whatever. Everybody has their perception of this. Mine is, it was for a period of time extremely organized and went into disarray as any empire eventually does. But do I disagree with him on Chicago somehow being, the preeminent, having control? Absolutely not.
Right. And he would always tell me that in Chicago, like you would actually have to get approval to kill somebody, and if not, then you would get whacked. But as we're in New York, people were just killing people left and right over petty shit. Like, you're hitting on my wife, you're hitting on my girlfriend, or hitting on my daughter, like I'm gonna kill you. And then obviously there's repercussions to that, right? Like the person that would kill this person would get killed, or their family would get hit, or something like that, right?
Okay, that he is, in my opinion, he's right on this point. Now, Chicago, because it was essentially one crime family organization, it worked with other crime groups and gangs, but they did have easier, there, for lack of a better term, an ability to have more control over that than New York. For this reason, in my opinion, New York had five families, and you've got rogue guys. And, when you're talking about five different families trying to get along, some of them take it upon themselves to break the rules. Yeah, oh, the guy from the Bonanno family's dating my girl. Let's go get him, or whatever. Look at John Gotti. He didn't get approval from the bosses to go kill his boss. They all ended up coming on board, though a couple of them very reluctantly, and wanted Gotti knocked off. But it almost makes it look like it was just a free for all. I don't believe it was a free for all, but definitely where Montana was correct. Yeah, in New York, it was more chaos than Chicago in that regard. Yeah. So I stand corrected on that.
So I know you're quite the expert on Lucky Luciano. Can you talk about why he's so important in the organized crime history, and who exactly who he was and what he did and all that?
Yeah, real briefly, my fascination with Luciano, I think, grew out of me not knowing a lot about him, just his name and that he was from New York, as compared to, say, a Capone, or when I really started getting keyed into this stuff when Gotti was like at his height at that time. So I started, consuming more on people beyond that. And as time goes on, I understood that Luciano really does deserve credit for creating a better family structure than had existed, and he also get deserves the credit for bringing together the multi-ethnic elements to make money. However, I think what fascinates me the most and why he was so important in American underworld history is that he was not alone. He was part of this giant network. It was the social network of the underworld before there was such a thing as a social network. He and Capone were tight. Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and hundreds of people that the casual mob fan would have never even heard of. If it wasn't for his sort of leadership and charisma and having a great group of tight friends, none of this would have even happened. And though that may sound like I'm glorifying it, let me be clear, there was going to be an underworld, and it was far better when those guys were running it, uh, than if when they weren't, is my view. So Luciano, I think, was really pivotal. Uh, it's just he didn't get quite the publicity. He did in New York, but, outside of New York, not so much. Like, Capone made the headlines, people like Dillinger and, Babyface Nelson, and those guys weren't gangsters, they were, outlaw kinda rogue, but Capone was a big key part of Luciano's success, and vice versa. So I think that's an important part of history, and that people don't really get taught, so I try to express that in my work.
So can you talk about Castellano and his hit, because I feel like that's a really important piece of organized crime history, right?
Yeah.
His murder and the successors that came after him and after them and so on and so forth.
Well, most people will say, Gotti was the poster boy for the mob. I believe every generation, if not pretty much every decade, kind of has their mouthpiece, and internally they hate it. Externally, people think it's great. Gotti made the mob cool again, for better or worse. But in killing Castellano, he violated pretty much every old school rule. And really, I mean, you can't have your boss being killed all the time. I don't care if you're talking about, Fortune 500 company, or the mafia. When you whack the boss, there's repercussions. And when he did that, even though they couldn't directly pin it on him, that made him a target, that made the Gambino family a target, that made the five families a target, and it made every writer, that came before my generation pounce all over this and put it back in the news. So I think it was profound. Now, if you're asking me, was the Castellano hit like something that was necessary, or half of the Gambino family would have probably argued that, yeah, that guy had to go one way or another.
Right. Yeah. I guess it's subject to who you would have asked, because I'm sure their rivals would have been like, yeah, he had to go. But I'm sure people close to him probably were pissed off at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's like any company. Some of his employees, thought he was a good businessman leader. But in Gotti's case specifically, it was Gotti's crew that was under the gun for some drug trafficking and some talking on, tapped wire, tapped phone lines, and Castellano got pissed and he didn't like Gotti and Gotti didn't like him at all. So everybody saw the writing on the wall. Somebody was going to get whacked, and Gotti and his compatriots decided to strike first.
So before we move on to talking about Hitman, um, what do you know about Whitey Bulger and his gang? I'm totally blanking on his gang's name, but I know he was responsible for something like 16 murders or something like that, right?
Yeah, his name still, it's interesting you bring that up because he is still one of those enigmatic, kind of shrouded in a little bit of mystery characters, but it's also a case of you just can't make this shit up. Like you talk about the politics involved. He had allegedly an FBI agent using him, and he was using the agent. How many people did Whitey actually kill or order killed? Well, that depends. Some of his surviving, cohorts have given some great interviews about it. The Winter Hill Gang, and there was even some argument over, that designation and what he actually ran, did or didn't do. I wish he was still here to ask him. I don't even want to go down the rabbit hole of what I think of, how he got killed, how that even happened. But he will, Andrew, he's probably forever going to be one of those characters that we might not ever really know everything. We just know that he was pulling a lot of strings and caught a lot of breaks, and that's not just from being lucky.
You can somewhat compare him to Al Capone, right? In the sense of being like so feared and so like being over so many different people, right?
Yeah, I can speak to this. A, a guy I know wrote a book, came out around the same time as my first or second book. And I remember talking to him because we were on the same publisher, Mark Silverman. And he, in his book, talked about how he got tied to a chair in a basement and it was Bulger's crew. And he said Bulger walked in. Now, obviously, he survived this. They roughed him up a bit, but he said to me, and I'm paraphrasing, but Silverman was a tough guy himself. And he said it was like looking into the eyes of the devil. Now, was that just because of the moment, or is that really how Whitey was? Because I've heard some people in interviews say he was, really nice, and maybe that's the dynamics of every human. I mean, like Whitey Bulger was really good with animals, and they said when he was hiding out, on the West Coast, people thought he was really friendly, and that kind of thing. Sociopath. There's it's like a scale of it. Not everybody's full on psycho like John Wayne Gacy. You know what I mean? There's degrees.
Right. You know what's funny is when Whitey was arrested, I wrote him like the second day he was arrested, and I was like, "Oh, this guy's not going to write me back. He's getting so much mail." And a week later, he wrote me back. We wrote probably for like 5 or 6 months, and he told me, "Do not write to Catherine." And I'm like, "He's not going to find out I'm going to write to Catherine." So I wrote to Catherine, and he wrote me
Oh,
back, and he's like, "I told you not to write to Catherine. This is it. Like, I'm done with you. We're never talking again." And I'm like, how did he find out? But I'm sure he was talking to her attorney and they were passing messages back and forth. And I actually talked to Photios. I don't know how you say his name. Photios Freddy Gias or Geis,
yeah.
the hitman that supposedly killed Bulger. And I asked him about it. Um, and at first he was like, I don't like rats. We knew he was coming here. I killed him. But then now he can only have a pencil, and he's in isolation for so long, and now he's trying to say that he didn't kill Bulger because he doesn't want all of his privileges taken away. He doesn't want to be in isolation, so he went from like bragging to being like, no, I didn't do it. I was just making that up.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody's tune changes when they're faced with things like that. But see, now you've learned your lesson. One of these guys tells you don't write to my wife or my girlfriend, don't, because they can find out. It's amazing, which you know as well. Who I'm sure we're gonna talk about briefly. Our friend Jose. He can find out anything in prison on the
Oh yeah,
outside.
yeah. Jose is yeah. We'll talk about Jose in a little bit. He was a pain in my ass for about a year for sure. So let's talk about mob and mafia hitmen. Let's start out with talking about Richard Kuklinski, and a lot of people like to revere him as like a serial killer who killed hundreds of people. But then there's a lot of experts that claim that he probably only killed like a handful of people. What do you think when it comes to Kuklinski? And I don't know if I'm saying his name right.
Yeah, Kuklinski, you're right. That's a great question. I lean towards the camp of he killed a few people. It's not because I don't want to believe him as much as fascinating as that HBO thing was with him, back in the 90s. That was mind blowing. But the problem is, again, as a historian, put my historian hat on. I dug into him a little bit because I was asked, which never materialized. I was supposed to be a guest on a documentary show. I could find very little on him. And even the claims, I read his book, I watched the documentaries, I cannot find anything on a lot of these killings. No, there's no records, no cadavers found. I mean, some of them were really extravagant. You know what I'm talking about. It's how is there none? Now I understand there are missing cases and cold cases, even like with Jose, we're going to get into. But I believe he was an embellisher. Maybe I'm wrong, but I lean towards the camp of he was psychotic. I believe he could have done some of those things. I just don't think he racked up, whatever, hundreds of bodies and had rats eat them and filmed it. And okay, well, where is all this shit then? You have to have a point where you're like, okay, I need to see at least, I don't know, something of substance to show me that this person even existed that you're talking about. So yeah, if that answers it for you.
Right. Yeah. The most interesting thing about Kuklinski, I think, is the story of him telling when he tied somebody up and they were praying to God, and he's like, you know what? I'm gonna let you pray to God, and if God comes down and saves you, then I won't kill you. And he walks in like an hour later, and he's like, oh well, I guess it's time to die.
Yeah,
Have
and
you heard
it's
that story?
great. That made a great scene in the movie. It was a great story he told. And you know as well as I do, some of these people are clever enough to come up with that kind of line to somebody on their own. However, again, I'm skeptical only because I've learned enough in this field that you have to have some skepticism. It's like I'm agnostic about it. If that may be true, I don't know that it is. And I don't know that he was a serial killer. Although, not to go down this rabbit hole of mob hitmen, he wouldn't be the first that, even before the term serial killer existed, back in the 30s when Murder Inc. was discovered in 1940, and they looked back at all these killings and they took the witness testimony and they were like, wow, these some of these guys were actually like getting bloodthirsty to the point that it was like exciting to them. Now, today we would probably say, wow, they're a professional killer with serial killer tendencies. Or, are they serial killers who found the perfect vocation? So, yeah, Kuklinski could have been. I just, until I see something more than the book that was written about him. Like show me who these dead people are, at least.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the
Yeah,
proof's got to be solid. I
I'm
mean,
like not sitting over here trying to be some, oh, that can't be true. No, I've seen crazy shit, over the decades in this world. It's just that one. Huh. Even a TV show that didn't happen, I know why it didn't happen because when they called me, I literally said to them, hey, just, full disclosure, I'm not so sure if you're going to go down this road of, oh, he killed 120 people. I can't like confirm that and go on camera and say, oh, yeah, he did this. And they didn't like that response. That was the only time I've ever had a TV producer kind of like, yeah, we'll be in touch. I knew they didn't want me.
right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you can't really bullshit just for a story, whatever, because eventually people are going to find the holes.
Yeah, yeah, you don't wanna do that. I don't wanna it's again, as a historian, I don't wanna do that. I love the entertainment value, and again, I say the book was great. The documentaries that HBO put out were amazing, and even if he didn't do all that, just to get into the brain of a guy who can even think like that and come up with that shit, it's, I think, a great psychological commentary. There is something to that. I just don't see a lot of hard evidence, except that what was the Gambino crew that was using him a little bit. I believe that. The Gemini crew. I believe they were using him, but here and there.
Yeah, so actually that's funny that you mentioned the Gemini crew because I was literally just about to bring them up. Can you talk about them and the DeMeo crew and what they were
Yeah.
all about? That was basically like a gang of serial killers, right?
Yeah, again, what that crew, the Roy DeMeo headed a crew in the Gambino family, and for anyone that doesn't know, each crew kind of has their specialty, even though they dabble in everything. DeMeo's was they chop cars, steal cars, and send them overseas was one of their big rackets. But they had their clubhouse, if you will, the Gemini Club. This crew also became the Gambino family's go-to for body uh, disposal. They like mastered bleeding body out, getting rid of the parts. It reminded me of Murder Inc. in the sense that okay, in the 1970s, these guys took it to that level where yeah, we're going to actually dismember the bodies in a bathtub. They were pretty crazy. In fact, again, this is underworld hearsay, but I think there's something to it. The story was that Gotti was worried about hitting Paul Castellano while Roy DeMeo's crew was active because they thought DeMeo's crew was that psychotic, and DeMeo kind of got along with Castellano. So, and again, it's underworld hearsay that you'll sometimes see in documentaries where they talk about, and it could have been true though. Gotti may have just been logical and like, hey, I'm not the only crew if I do this, and DeMeo, they're sick bastards over there, and ultimately they were. They were they were pretty bloodthirsty. There's no joke about that.
Right. And you could say that the DeMeo crew was like the most feared when it came to like hitmen, right, in the world of organized crime at their time period.
Yeah, I would say because they had gained a reputation for the bloodlust, um, even people who didn't know they were cutting the bodies up, they knew the DeMeo crew was very willing and able to make somebody disappear. They were used for professional hit type stuff, but um, it just to make the distinction, it wasn't like they were the Gambino's family hit squad per se. It was more they are the okay, we'll hit them, but we'll get rid of all the bodies type of crew.
Right. So the last hitman I want to ask you about is Filippo Gangatano. Am I saying that right?
I'm not
The,
sure how it's pronounced.
the gay hitman. You know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
Do you
Now
know much about him?
I do not have a lot of history on him. Uh, I know who he is, and it's definitely not my expertise. You probably know more about him than I do, so you can educate me. What do you know about him?
Well, I know that he was a gay hitman, obviously, and I know that I forget what crew he was a part of, but I know that they didn't like the fact that he was gay, and I know
Yeah,
that he was
that's
killed.
happened. Not sorry to interrupt, but there was one in the DeMeo crew, and I can't remember his name. There have been some, yes, that some guys overlook it and other ones don't like it. But go on. I'm sorry.
Right, and I know that he was killed by his cousin in 2002. After it says it was announced that the mafia had begun accepting gay men into its ranks, which I think that pissed his cousin off. So he offed his cousin, who was the gay hitman, which I find super interesting that they were family members, let alone one whacked each other. Like it seems like that would have been a big no no. But this was 2002, so I'm sure the mafia at that point in time was like kind of dying down, so to speak.
Right, right, and I think now I vaguely remember some of this, and for not having all the facts in front of me, I will say from the outside, this reminds me of what it must be like if you are different than the rest of your family and you go tell them, and even some of your own family members will disown you. So imagine that horror. Imagine the horror of being in the mob and you're a hitman yourself, but your own family member is willing to take you out because you've upped it to a level of where violence is definitely a part of that world. It is.
Right, right. Yeah, that's
They
super
don't sit that.
crazy to
Yeah, it's
me.
like it's not. I'm just going to disown you. It's like okay, I'm going to kill you. It takes it to another level, which is problematic, to say the least. But yeah, that story now it rings a vague bell, and he wasn't
Right,
the first, gay man to be in the mob. Some of them were suspected, and some were open. Some were protected. That case, I think what I was getting at is I think that is family can be worse than the mafia. Seriously. Yeah, it's not the you know what I'm saying? Like when somebody in the family comes out or there's a death in the family or something, everybody's true colors shine. And that's when you see every, a-hole in your family is when
right,
something like that comes up. That's why I think I could be wrong, but I think it had more to do with some kind of, I don't know, family honor or something.
right. Yeah, most definitely. Amy and Jennifer, do you want to ask him anything about the mob or mafia before we move on to the cartel?
I
I'm
do.
good. I'm waiting on the cartel.
Is there anything in TikTok?
I
While you're doing
don't.
that, I'll ask a question.
Yeah, not. Yeah, no. Go ahead.
What about the Teamsters?
Oh, the Teamsters, well, every union, going back to the 1930s, every kind of labor element had the mob in it. The mob saw that as major opportunity. It's like, hey, we can make money off the companies, we can make money off the workforce. So yeah, and the Teamsters, of course, we could go on for days about Jimmy Hoffa and what possibly happened there. The short answer is just like in contemporary times with police and politicians in Mexico, here, if there was an opportunity and money could buy you that opportunity, or hostile takeover, like insert your own people into the Teamsters, it's going to happen. So yeah, that's not conspiracy theory. That's history. That is part of Americana, for better or worse. That's how it rolled. The labor unions. The thing that sucks is it's the workers and those people who got the short end of the stick there.
I got you. I know some people who work for the Teamsters, and it's still an interesting organization.
I think it always will be. Like, I'm not that cynical. I'm just pragmatic. I think there's always going to be an element of backroom deals and, in the alley handshakes. It's just, I hate to say this, but it's almost like that's how things work. And believe me, I'm rebellious. I don't like this system, but that's how the system works. And organized crime and labor went hand in hand. Some of it was beneficial to labor. It was, it back in the day, especially. We're in a different era. But okay, that's enough on that. I could go on all night.
My husband's
Amy, didn't
family
you?
is Sicilian. I'll have to see if they have any ties to any of these people.
Yeah, right. And you know what? Don't be surprised if there are. It seems we all have some kind of like 6 degrees of separation somehow.
I'm just glad that it was his mom's side who was Sicilian and not his dad's, because I couldn't handle the last name.
Oh, what was it?
Fiandaca.
Oh, wow. That's pretty ethnic. I thought mine was.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like his grandfather was Pasquale Fiandaca.
Oh, yeah, that's about as hardcore as you can get right there.
Yeah.
Amy, didn't you tell me like a week or two ago that Jimmy Hoffa's son or grandson got kicked out of the Teamsters like not long ago?
No. He was president, and they just had a new they have a new one now. So he's been ousted from that position. Whoever the Hoffa is that was still in there.
Oh, so he's still like active in the Teamsters?
I guess. I don't know how their hierarchy goes. I just know that it was a contentious thing. I like having my insider. If I could go back and do life over again and I couldn't go into linguistics, I'd probably go into employment law and work with unions and stuff like that, because it's crazy the stuff that the unions still get into, like with their strikes and stuff. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah. Pretty crazy world.
Very much so. And it's just I don't know. It's I know that they're there to help the people get, fair wages and stuff like that, but I don't know. I think about those backdoor deals and what happens there.
Right. So, Christian, let's talk about the cartel. What are the differences and similarities between the mob, the Italian mafia, and the cartel?
A lot. I can't say all, but I think in the last at least 50 years, what we've seen, most gang and underworld organizations modeled themselves after the GOAT. Okay, and I'm not saying that just because I'm Dago, but the greatest of all time, if you will, the original structured mafia, the Sicilian Italian, is what a lot of these groups modeled themselves after. And this is why, because it worked. I mean, it certainly isn't a perfect thing, or it, would still be powerful. There's always a ebb and flow of what empire is on top, but essentially the common thread is a lot of them will tell you, you interview some of these guys, or you watch some of them, read their books, then they always, it's the same things, and understandably, yeah, love The Godfather, Scarface, the Al Capone, the Lucky Luciano. This is what they modeled it to be, a business like that, only a criminal empire. So yes, the cartels are the same. In fact, it's often not even called cartel there. It's like, is that guy Mafia? In Spanish, that's what they would say. It's become the term. You look at the Mexican Mafia, which is not the cartel. It's its own entity to be reckoned with. But why did they pick the name Mexican Mafia? Well, it's okay. And semantically speaking, it's badass to say that, and they structured it very similar. There's a hierarchy. There's someone in charge. There's a board of directors. I don't know if that's like too vague or all over the place, but if that answers your question, it's because it was the system that seemed the most honorable and the one that worked at least within the last century. So that's why a lot of these groups model themselves on the alleged mafia way. And of course, believing in the existential concept of omerta, which it isn't a thing as much as it's a lot of things. You don't talk to police, you take care of it yourself within the group. Yeah, those kind of things.
Okay, I have to butt in here. So when you talk about the fact that it has a board of directors, I teach like business organizations and stuff like that, and I can't help. So I automatically think, I'm like, what? So it's set up like a corporation? What does the board of directors do?
Okay, you know what? I'm really glad you do that and brought this up. Andrew, I got to jump back to one of your original questions then. The difference between the mob and the mafia. Okay, so in 1931, what Luciano's entourage did is they set up 5 mafia-based families, but each had basically a leader or delegate that sat at what metaphorically was a giant boardroom where the heads of the Jewish rackets, and again, to a much lesser degree at that time, the Irish, whoever was a bigwig in their field or their mini mob, were sitting at what we historians, again, it's kind of a broad statement, but we call it the board of directors. So you had mafioso bosses, you had Jewish racket leaders that would all then decide together, what do we do about issue XYZ? Lucky Luciano always was kind of the head of it, but I hate when people say that because they didn't really have a CEO, CFO, but the most charismatic one was usually everything was deferred to that person eventually. Meyer Lansky, the Jewish guy, he was sort of their de facto money man. So if that answers it for you, it essentially was like a board of directors where you bring in all the different factions and pick a delegate from each faction. So yes, today the cartels, stop me if I'm rambling too much, guys, just stop me. But
no, you're good.
To the cartels, they, like a lot of others, formulated essentially on a mafia type hierarchy, but it is a business. So all the honor and, all that crap aside, it's about having not one in charge. And I will give you an example. People say, oh, El Chapo, the head of the Sinaloa cartel, goes to prison. El Chapo is one leader of the Sinaloa cartel. The Sinaloa cartel is a cartel, different groups. El Mayo Zambada is one of the other major leaders. It's not one guy. The Jalisco cartel, They're saying El Mencho is the leader. Now that one is a newer cartel, so I'm not sure. Actually have to ask my good friend Yon Grillo about that, if he is a singular kind of leader. But in most cases, the cartels were leaders working together, but somebody is always going to be the figurehead. I have the press secretary come out for the president, and they're suddenly the figurehead for everybody's questions and answers. Well, John Gotti liked to be in the press, so he basically became the Gambino family's, figurehead. But in that case, he actually was the final say of that mafia family, not of the New York mafia. There were 4 other bosses that sat at a table. So does that make sense? Like, it's okay, we're all doing our own thing, but for the betterment of our economics, we come together once a year or whatever, meet and iron shit out. And that basically it didn't get created by it. It was honed down to something more doable and workable by the Lucky Luciano, Al Capone, Bugsy Siegel era. And now the cartels do it. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. I'm sorry, there's so much in my brain on this. I'm trying to keep it straight.
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, really, I guess like the difference would be that for a regular business, you don't have people coming together on the board of directors to do those things. It's
right. You still have to carry out your day to day, and you have managers or capos that like, hey, I handle this part. If there's a big problem, I go to my boss. If it's really a problem, he then calls all of them in. Like Andrew brought up about killing a guy from another family because he's dating your girlfriend. Okay, to do that without repercussions, you better take that to your boss, who takes it to his, who takes it to the board for them to decide how that goes down. It's like in any company, some low-level manager decides he's just going to write $100,000 check for some new copy machines. That dude's going to get fired. Like, it's going to go up to the higher ups. You can't just do that, but you also have to run your day-to-day business, and that's why you have these people in place. It's the same with the cartel. Oh, another factor in the mafia or organized crime in general, it's insulation. The more people you have between whoever is the figurehead or, fair enough to say shot caller, ultimate, the buck stops here. You have to have lots of people in between you so that when RICO statutes come after you, you've got enough buffer to say, oh yeah, that guy doesn't even know me. So
RICO is one of my favorite things to teach.
Yeah, you gotta love that one. That's the most
teaching RICO.
Underused but yet abused. I don't know. It's crazy, that one. But anyway, yeah. I have to take your class. I'll just speak. Yeah, RICO. Today it's more from just being a board of directors to, okay, how can we seriously insulate the top people as much as possible? And it plays into having other figures, except they just don't always meet, like physically, like you would if you worked for AT&T or Verizon. You bring in your board of directors and stakeholders. You don't bring them into a room anymore.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. Since we're back on the earlier guys, I have a question. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to date myself a little bit here.
It's okay.
Why in the world did they ever think there was something that was going to be in Capone's vault?
Oh my God, poor. When I watched
watching that as a kid. It was
poor Geraldo. Yeah. I felt bad for Geraldo Rivera. I was a kid, and I'm watching that. Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, I knew who Al Capone was, but I didn't even know till later. Again, it kind of goes to my upbringing. It's like, wow, I had to learn about a lot of this shit later. But why did they think that? I think it was wishful thinking. And yeah, you never know. But it's like I've even been on some of these shows where they kind of do the treasure hunting and they have me come, me and others come in and give our thoughts. But they don't usually find any treasures because there aren't any. And when I'm asked, why aren't there any treasures? Short answer is you go to jail or you get whacked. I can guarantee everyone and their mother is going to raid your stuff and take it. There is no let the cops come and find it. It was the same with Luciano in New York when Arnold Rothstein died. The joke was the cops were watching the offices. The body wasn't even cold yet, and all these gangster minions are in his office rifling through to get all the life insurance policies, the oil well leases. And what did the police do? Not a damn thing. It's crazy, but true. And when Geraldo opened that vault, I think they were hoping to at least find some piece of history beyond. Now, do you remember, was it just like a broken bottle or something they found in there? Or if even that?
I don't remember, but I remember him. I remember his face looking very like, oh.
Yeah, he was. I did. And it's funny, to go on to be a journalist later. And I look back, I'm like, oh, man, that had to be rough. I don't know if I could walk away from that.
I thought it was awesome. I thought he took a chance.
That is true.
He took a chance.
He's a better man than me because I think it would have crushed my ego. But hey, if you don't take a chance, and that's right. Who
you're
knows?
Never gonna win if you don't take a chance. And we were all shocked. Everybody was shocked.
You never know, because I'm a collector too, not as much as some of my friends and mentors. They're like masters of collecting. It may not be in a vault you open on national TV, but I'll tell you what, to this day, there are things popping up in people's garages and attics that end up in collectors' hands that you're like, holy hell, I can't even believe that exists. Like, I'll just throw in a quick example. Last year, a year before, a short 16 millimeter home movie went up on auction in the Mob Museum, who I freelance for. They ended up winning it. It's only like 13 minutes long, but it's from 1928 and shows Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello on the back of Al Capone's boat jetting around Miami. And that is a piece of history that you're like, all this time someone had this home silent movie, one of Capone's descendants, and it ends up on auction. So you never know what's going to pop up tomorrow that is an actual piece of history that verifies what we've been trying to say. Like, yeah, Al Capone was buddies with these guys and vice versa. And wow, here is film footage of them smiling in bathing suits on the back of a boat. That's
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. The average person would be like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, right. But
it's funny.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna tell you that it's funny because people ask like all the time. They're like, "When are you guys having another live? And who's gonna be on it?" And I was telling about you, and every single person that I've mentioned it to, except for my mom, has had something to say about Al Capone's vault. So it is something that has stayed with all of us.
I'm sure Geraldo still gets razzed about it a little, but you guys bring up a great point. He had the cojones to do it. And you know what? Again, like I said, you never know what you will or won't find. That's why I love my mentors and my friends, because they come up with some stuff that just blows my mind. And I've been very blessed that they've even given me some artifacts that I'm still speechless. So you never know. It makes it fun, and it shows the reality of this history. It wasn't fake. Capone did have a vault, but I'm sure his people got everything out of it the minute Capone got convicted.
They would have waited that long?
Yeah, you're right. They'd probably before, right, the minute he stepped out of the office, they were probably like, yeah, we better do this now. Oh, they also say he buried stuff in his yard because, he kind of lost his mind at that point. Yeah, maybe, but I don't think so. I think his family and his brother probably would have made sure everything that needed to be in its rightful place was. So that's my thoughts.
Interesting.
So on the topic of organized crime, mafia and mob, I use the word respected loosely, but I've always respected the mob and mafia way more than the cartel because, like, the cartel, correct me if I'm wrong, but they'll kill like innocent people, chop kids' heads off and stuff like that. As where Tony Montana would tell me, like the mafia and mob would normally kill like snitches or other, mafia or mob members. As where the cartel is just like, we don't give a fuck who you are. We're gonna kill you if you cross us or piss us off or whatever.
Okay. Yes and no. There was a time when there were rules of engagement that largely were followed. The mob didn't take out cops. They didn't take out innocents. You tried to avoid collateral damage as much as possible. Even the sick, crazy ones, I mean, they lured their victim to them so that, but there were collaterals. That is, it's crime. There's going to be collateral. The cartel took it to a different level in 1985 when DEA agent Kiki Camarena got killed. That changed things, but the cartel also suffered quite a bit for that, and many heads of that what would later be the Sinaloa cartel were very, very upset and rightfully frightened at whoever gave the order to torture and kill that DEA agent. Now, jump ahead. I say yes and no because the Mexican cartel, and I'll be specific about that. I'm not going to get into the other Latin American like Colombia and what Escobar did. Escobar was desperate, and yeah, a lot of innocents. He didn't care. That to me was sort of an anomaly, not exactly. So don't quote me on like, oh, just one time. No, the Mexicans screwed up in 85, but they still kind of had some rules. At least the old school dudes did. It changed, and what I think you're referring to, and I could be wrong, but the short-lived but very violent Zetas, they came to power in the early 2000s. They were paramilitary, former military and police, and they essentially, I don't even think it was about drug trafficking anymore. It was about how many people's heads can we cut off to make a point. Like, let's copy off of ISIS. And it got so bad that the other cartels would go and do extreme prejudice in killing anyone and anything that had anything to do with the Zetas. So the violence just escalated, and now we're in an era where it's a new generation. And I'm not just speaking about Jalisco, just in general, it's new generation, and not all the old rules are appreciated or abided by. I don't know that that's a cultural thing or is so much as it's a TikTok world now, and people want to post the most bizarre shit they can instead of focusing on the business itself. Or, I don't know. Maybe I sound old and dated because I think that even the Mexican mafia, which, began in the prison system, and they run things very violently, but the threat of violence, it isn't like if they find out some affiliated gang on the street is out killing grandmothers, I can assure you the Mexican mafia in San Quentin or wherever is going to have that person killed. So it's not that it's not the same level of respect as it was back in the good old days. But I don't think we can broad stroke it like it's just the Mexicans are just evil, and no, there are elements of it, but yeah, that's my personal take on it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I there's definitely going to be pushback, and I know there are people who could sit across from me and argue, and I'm open to that. I'm telling you from my studies of it and the people I know within it. I don't know everybody. It's just like you know, I can't say every Italian or every Jewish mobster was upstanding and followed the rules. No, they all didn't. That definitely wasn't the case. There were plenty of mob hits, even in the 70s, where little kids, riding their bike past a place where a car bomb was. Hey, it's like, hey, we got to do the job, and you do the job. It's terrible, but there's always going to be collateral damage.
You said just a second ago, you mentioned something about the Mexican mafia and the gangs, if they found out somebody was doing this or that. I've heard that MS-13 has affiliation with one of the cartels. Are there more that exist like MS-13 that are also connected?
Great question. I don't think we have the full complexity of that understood yet. I think law enforcement every day works their ass off to try to figure it out. But yes, what the cartels, part of why they excel and became the transnational, the global dominant force, besides geography and just tenacity, they've learned to use other groups. And remember, I was talking about insulation earlier. It's also another insulating factor. Use some street level gang, or at least like a geographically regional gang that you believe has enough sway to sell your product, and they can then use them. And what the cartels generally do now, you could be cartel affiliated in, say, Chicago, Philadelphia, Brownsville, Texas, but you may not have ever stepped foot in Sinaloa or have ever met someone who's on the other end of that burner phone, but you're associated. It's sort of like what Andrew brought up before about associates. The cartels are more about using the gangs or associates in other areas to do a lot of the groundwork. If that kind of puts it in a, I know I'm really narrowing stuff down. There's a lot of, as you guys know, it's very dynamic and complex, but essentially, if that answers your question, yes, like the MS-13s will have certain alliances, or, the Bloods or Crips or subdivisions within them might have certain alliances. The Mexican Mafia mastered that by doing, they're a prison gang, yet they were able to do stuff on the street by setting up these, working relationships. But the thing is, you still have to follow the rules. Andrew, this kind of goes to what you were saying. Again, I'm not defending it because the violence is quite out of hand. Ask anybody who lives in Mexico that covers this stuff. It is ridiculous. But if you are on the street in Los Angeles and you are associated with doing business with them, and you screw up or do something that brings more light on them, they're going to get you. So there is some motivation to behave to some extent. If that kind of makes sense a little.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want them cutting your head off.
No.
So you kind of have to. And the problem is, in crime, in the underworld, you're dealing with, the criminal minded. So you're going to have ones that don't follow the rules, or they do something so outrageous. Hence, even in Mexico, the short life of the Zetas, they were so damn violent that even the other cartels couldn't stand it.
What happened to them?
a lot of their leaders were killed or taken into custody. Their territories were taken over by the other cartels, and whatever was left of them probably assimilated into other cartels or went underground. Yeah, they were too violent for their own good. It kind of defeated, it was almost counterproductive when all you do is kill. Like, what happened to the drug trafficking part of this? Like, that's what I always like. Did you guys forget about the actual business? Like, but yeah, they were hated, and you'll find out, like Jose, he minces no words on what the Sinaloans' thoughts on Zetas were.
Right. Before we talk about Jose, I want to mention somebody real quick. Actually, two people real quick. Are you familiar with La Kika?
Yes.
So I used to write him, and he was responsible for the deaths of like 40 police officers in Colombia, and he allegedly, or not allegedly, he's convicted of bombing an American airline, I believe, and 110 civilians died.
Right. One of Escobar's worst affronts on humanity, but yeah.
Yeah, he told me. I asked him. I was like, "So how did you get into the cartel with Escobar?" And he's like, "I dropped out of school when I was young. I did it to provide for my family. I'm not a bad guy. Blah blah blah." And he told me he would do an interview once he gets out of isolation. And I asked him when that would be, and he's like, "Whenever the feds decide I'm not dangerous anymore." And I'm like, "Well, that'll be never."
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Don't hold your breath. But that's really cool. You talked to him. Yeah, he'd definitely be an interesting one to speak with. His story, there is that common thread too. This isn't hyperbole. It's not made up. It's not fairy tale. There are common threads. A lot, not all, but a lot of people, I don't care if you're talking about the 1920s or 1980s or now, it's still an economic thing. Yeah, it helps if you are on the sociopathic kind of spectrum and an opportunist to find your way into organized crime when you don't see a lot of other pathways. You can argue, well, there's always a path. Go back to Lower East Manhattan in the 1920s. You've got a bunch of Jewish people and a bunch of Italians shoved into this poor, shithole, and they either get along or they don't, and you either get out or you don't. Some of them went on to be doctors, lawyers, whatever. Others saw their only opportunity in the opportunity in front of them, and that was vice. And vice is something you guys haven't asked this, but I'll throw it out there. Which came first, the chicken or the egg, the gangster or the vice, is the ultimate question. Because as long as we as humanity want drugs, alcohol, gambling, hookers, whatever it is, our thing, there's always going to be that that provider. It's supply and demand. So La Kika, you mentioned him. What did he have in Medellin, Colombia at that time? Well, at least according to him, nothing. So what was a good opportunity when you find out your buddies or whoever is working for this guy who's building soccer fields and putting electricity in the shanty town? I'm not saying it's right, because again, you could argue someone else grew up to be a nurse. Why did this poor, soul end up this route? I think that's the psychology, and maybe it's just, I don't know what door seems easier. What do we all kind of try? The path of least resistance. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I'm sorry, Andrew. I probably just went off on a tangent there when you talk.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. One more guy I want to mention before we talk about Jose is Edgar Valdez Villarreal, aka La Barbie.
Yeah.
I wrote him one time and he wrote me back.
Really?
And ever since then, it says he's not in BOP custody anymore. Do you know if he snitched his way out of prison? Because he was serving a 49-year federal sentence. And I've heard that he's a snitch from other people in that prison and he's not there anymore.
That's a great question. Actually, let me ask you first. Which facility was he in that he's no longer at? If you remember,
God, it was I honestly don't remember. Let me see if it's on here.
That's okay. I was curious because I actually didn't know which one he was in. And I don't know what happened. I have not heard from any of my sources anything about him in a while, actually. So you've just perked my ears. I'm going to see what I can find out about that. I mean, not to sound like it's some conspiracy or whatever, but I am very curious what happened to him because that was an interesting story too.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now as of February 2023. It was Coleman 2, but he's not in BOP custody. If you look him up, they're either hiding him or he's in witness protection, one or the other, which makes
If
me
his
think that
name
he's a
doesn't
snitch
come up
now.
in the federal at all, or his number or his previous
Oh,
number.
Jose doesn't?
No, I'm telling you, if his name or number does not come up in any of the in the federal search, that's interesting. That piques my curiosity of where
Right.
he
Yeah, it
is
makes
and
me
what's
think that he
going on.
snitched his way out of the feds.
Oh, it's quite possible. I mean, that kind of thing happens a lot. Not everybody snitches, but sometimes, for them, that's the best, I guess, avenue. I don't know. I have a hard time with the whole snitching thing.
So since we're on the topic of cartels and stuff like that, what about Wild Bill? What is his last name?
William Holbert. Do you know anything about William Holbert?
William Holbert. No.
He's an American citizen who went over to Panama and killed like 5 or 6 people and claimed he was a part of the cartel in Panama, or he was like a hitman for them, which I don't fully buy.
Wait,
honestly.
when was this?
Hang on.
I've interviewed him like 10 times. I should know this. Hold on one second.
Does he stand by that story?
Yes.
He's
this
wrote a
was
book
in
about it.
Yeah, he's serving a 47-year prison sentence in Panama. He was arrested in 2010, July 26th to be exact.
So this is relatively recent. Huh. I'll have to look into that. I feel stupid. I am not familiar with this case.
I was actually curious because Andrew and I have talked several times about whether or not his story is legit. Like, I totally believe that, he killed these people. His path, like, around was, basically like taking people, like mooching off of them and then, going to the next place. And then they started killing people as they're going through. And
he would take over their properties.
Yeah. And yeah, that's what he was doing. And if I'm not mistaken, he buried it. Did he bury all of them in the one property, or was it just the ones?
I'm not sure, honestly. I know he buried some on one of the properties. I don't know if he buried them all on the same property or not.
So he ends up getting busted for it. But anyhow, I don't know. I've talked to him a lot, and I've tried to get his, I mean, I think the stuff that he's told me about his experience with the cartel is not something that would be unique enough, if that makes sense. Like, it wouldn't be anything that's more proprietary in nature. Because like what he's told me is, well, I've done hits for the Colombian and the Mexican cartel. He's like, and I hate working for the Mexican cartel. He's like, because, if they've got 5 people standing there and only one of them's guilty, he said the Colombians, they'll figure out which one won. He was like, Mexican cartel just tell you to kill all of them. And he's like, and I don't like killing innocent people.
Interesting. Is he generic in what specific cartels? Or is he just refer to the nationalities of them? Or I don't know. Do you take him does he, there's something to be said about sensing somebody's sincerity, or, I don't know. What are your vibes? What do you guys think?
Well, he's written 2 books about it, right? And how I ended up coming across him was actually, I think, through Andrew. And anyhow, him and I started talking, and it was about whether or not, basically, can I have your rights to your books, and I'll, edit them republish and do all that stuff. And anyhow, that's what it was. Anyhow, I have the books, but I haven't seen anything specific in it name wise either. Have you heard anything, Andrew?
No, to be honest with you, I think he's just a serial killer, but that's my opinion. I think he just wants to play a role in which he's not, and I hope none of his groupies come attack me because he has tons of groupies on Facebook. But that's what I truly believe, is he's just a serial killer.
That's quite possible. Again, I can't speak with any authority until I look into it, but you guys know this, and fans or followers of this serial killer history at least should know as well, and I'm sure they do, that some of them really did create their own narratives. Yeah, they actually killed people, but they'd have their own stories in their heads. Some were very on the level with what they did, and other ones, it's like out there. So to me, it's almost a 50-50. Is this guy for real? Did he really, work for, I don't know, the Sinaloans or something? Or was it, no, I just killed people, but this sounds really cool. Like, I don't know, some kind of spy movie. Because, you got to figure that a lot of them, at least part of the time, live in an alternate universe. Again, that's just the skeptic in me.
Right. So to round this out, let's talk about Jose Martinez, El Mano Negra. And it's funny, the day he was arrested in Alabama, right, for the murder of the man that insulted his daughter or something like that, I wrote him the very first day he was arrested because I was like, this guy's confessing to 25 murders or something like that. Like, this guy's probably full of shit, and he claims to be part of the cartel. Like, this is probably some crazy lunatic who just wants media coverage. And I wrote him, and I started to talk to him. And the second letter, he's like, you can ask me anything you want. You can ask me about my crimes, this and that. So I was like, okay, how many bodies do you have? What was your method of execution? How many states did you operate in? And then he came back and he's like, my amigos are going to come and visit you at your college. And he told me what college I was at, and he's like, I'm gonna kill you. He even drew me in a noose. I think I've showed you the
right. That was my first illustration.
And he thought I was a cop, and that's why he said that. And I wrote him back, and I was like, "What's your problem? You told me I can ask you anything that you want that I can. Like, why are you trying to threaten to kill me?" And I was thinking to myself, like, nobody's gonna sanction a hit of a freaking white college student over asking this dude about his past and everything. And I was just like, wow. And he probably threatened to kill me like another dozen times after that, which I didn't really take them too serious. I kind of laughed and was like, haha, okay, Jose, like, let's stop with that bullshit. And he even was writing another female pen pal that I let video visit him on mine, which she got me banned for 30 days because she showed the vag on video one time. And that was a big no-no for video visiting. But he sent a drawing that I have still on a postcard, and it was his family. It was him, her, and Pero, which is the dog, and I was the dog. of all things, like he said I was a dog, which I thought was hilarious.
You got it. Now, unfortunately, some of that was at your expense. One thing I have learned about him is he does have a sense of humor. It can be pretty warped at times, but one of the things when you introduced me to him, and I even put this in the book, that's coming out later. I gave you a shout out because I know I wasn't like fully on board, and you kept saying, all right, just talk to him. And, I'm like, okay. And finally I did. And he disarmingly charming. He was cool. Like those first couple calls, 3 ways we did. And then I started video visiting with him, and yeah, but I saw his wrath a few times myself. He didn't talk to me for like, I don't know, like 6 months or something. And I just was like, okay, man, you don't want to do this. We don't have to. I was cool about it. Like, all right. And then he came back and was like, no, it's I want you to do this. All right. So yeah, I've had my little ups and downs, but I know you too. You and him. I'm sorry, it's just funny sometimes. Like
it
was almost like
I have a dark sense of humor too, and I'm just like, this fucking cartel hitman is threatening to kill me so many times. Like, I can't not laugh at it because it's like the dude's never getting out of prison, and nobody's gonna sanction him killing some dude over like him having delusions in his head, like I'm doing this and doing that. When in reality, I'm like, just tell me, like you told me I can ask you anything, so I'm asking you everything that I want to know, which I ask other serial killers and like hitmen. I guess I've spoke to a couple others besides Jose, but like yeah, I'll ask you whatever I want to since you gave me that open invitation, and now you're like getting pissed at me. Like, what's your problem?
Yeah, something that I find interesting. I'm occasionally asked, what's it like to get to know somebody like this or interview them, and I can only speak for me, and in this case, just this case, I think it's different. Like any person that you meet, how you interact and behave. I did find over the years it was easier for me to get Jose to open up about stuff by being more casual with him. An approach that uh, I know some journalists wouldn't do. They'd be like, yeah, it's great to watch the Ted Bundy tapes and stuff, and where you see where they're kind of like grilling him. Yeah, but when did Bundy really open up to them? When
Right.
they stopped being assholes. Like, look, I have all the respect in the world for hard hitting journalists that sit across from the president or whatever, and yeah, hit him with the hard questions. And don't get me wrong, I've done that. It's just in this case, it seemed after you introduced me to him, and that took a while for me to read the room fully. And it's gotten to a point where I think it benefited everybody involved. He seems happy. Don't get me wrong. He gets pissed at me sometimes, if I don't come through on something, maybe rightfully so. But other times he has surprised me with tidbits that's taken, what, since 2018. Andrew, is that when you first introduced me to him? Like
Yeah, it's
early
been
20.
about 5 years now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's taken that long for him to finally like dish out some more little tidbits of, wow, like this is why the book manuscript isn't turned in yet. I'm like, he keeps doing it, and I find more stuff, and I credit some of it to I suck at a lot, but I think I handled this as best I could. And I don't know. I try to maintain mutual respect with them, and it seems to have hopefully paid off. We'll see.
Right. I know for a while he was, when I was talking to him last, which was like, I don't know, 1.5, 2 years ago, he was trying to get me to contact the Walla Walla, Walla Walla, Washington, the cold case
Right.
detectives about a cold case he claims to have committed there, and he would give me no details, and he's like, just tell them that I'm a convicted murderer and I killed somebody in Walla Walla, and I'm like, well, I need more information than that. They're just gonna laugh at me and just tell me to piss off, and he would never give me any details. So I was just like, to hell with it, whatever. And I stopped talking to him for a while. But correct me if I'm wrong, but he's convicted in Alabama, California, and I don't know the other states. I know California he has the most convictions in, right?
Right. 9 murders and 1 attempted murder in California, 1 in Alabama, and the last trial he has been in was the conviction in 2019 in Florida for a double homicide.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because he kept signing his name, death row inmate. I have
Yeah.
a card which he used like actual semen to glue this little artwork together, and he signed it death row inmate. And I was telling Jose, I'm like, dude, you're not going to get the death penalty, so this is going to look really dumb, when I post this. Like, death row inmate gets life sentence.
Yeah, exactly. And he did, the jury did cut him a break in that case. Florida only spent the money to extradite him there, and they were quoted as saying this. They were only doing it because they wanted the death penalty, and they didn't get it. The jury gave him mercy. So, because I remember talking to him right after it, I had heard something people might not think of when they hear serial killers or professional killers, because he's been called both. There was an air of, I don't know if gratitude is the right word, but boy, he seemed elated and relieved that he didn't get the death penalty. And why I say that is because a month before that, I interviewed him for a college class that I was asked to, do like a presentation, guest lecture. And I interviewed him a little more professionally for that. And I asked him about that whole death penalty thing. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to hell. I'm probably going to get, death penalty. I'm ready for it. And then when he found out they gave him, they were merciful, it was almost like just you could feel, it was palpable how even a sociopath was relieved. Like, guess what? Death is real, and it was scary for him. Now, again, I don't want to put words in his mouth or speak for him. It's my perception of him that day when he told me was, oh, that's a guy that actually was a little worried. So for what it's worth, I just thought I'd share that.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting because he's never had any care for his victims, so it's kind of ironic. Like somebody just said in the comments, "Wow, the jury showed him more mercy than he showed his victims." The irony, and which is true.
Yeah, and that the comment, that's a really good point. And again, I'll play devil's advocate here because in my role, I am trying to present what he provided, what the police provided, and what I could find independently, and look at it from same way I am politically, very centrist. Everybody else can get their judgment, but on that note, there were a lot of complexities that were introduced by the defense. You can say it's horseshit or whatever, but there were things that he didn't even want brought up that the defense finally talked them into because it was embarrassing, for lack of a better term, of sort of what happened in his childhood. And when they brought in some experts to talk about some of the abuse and brain damage and incest and these other horrible things, I think the jury was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe, an upbringing that rough can. And I'm not saying, the jury should or shouldn't have, given him a death penalty or whatever. It's just when people ask me, well, why do you think they felt sympathetic? And I think the defense presented stuff that I know personally that Jose would have preferred not even be in the case just because of his pride, but it helped save his life. So,
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I never really knew about the incest. I know he had a horrible childhood, but I didn't really know that he was being molested or raped or whatever by his parents or whoever it was.
it's more physical abuse, but also the environment he was in. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but it was rough for the migrants. And, they brought this up. You are talking about California's Central Valley in the late 60s, early 70s. It was it was a marginalized group of people. They were. This isn't, a political statement or some social commentary. It's just fact. Okay. Yeah, it was marginalized, and some of them took to drug trafficking in those days, and he happened to be around it, and death and his sister getting killed just unleashed something, and he had been beaten, and yeah, they said there was brain damage. The prosecution said it wasn't. It was, hey, I don't know. You don't just well, maybe some people are specifically born this way. I think there was a little wiring off, and his environment then further contributed to it. I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or, makes it okay. It just, that's my thought.
Right. How many people has he told you that he's killed in total, both here and in Mexico? Do you have like a number that he's told you?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm still trying to find out for sure about one or two that he later said, "Oh yeah, I forgot that one," but then kind of said, "Well, no, not really." I stand by minimum 36, give or take, but I'm leaning towards probably 2, 3 more, maybe. I'm trying to be conservative about it, but I'm thinking it's more towards 40 than it is 30. And
Damn, that's crazy.
of the ones that he's been convicted, that's again 9, 1 attempted, 2 more, and another one, so 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 that he's been convicted of. Those cases are closed. There's a whole lot that aren't, some of which I haven't even been able to find a cold case file. The police department's like, we never heard of this case. I'm okay. Then there's others that they're like, oh, we're not giving you that. Okay, I get it. It's cold case. You're not going to give it to me. Give me something. No, we're not going to give it to you because California law says we don't have to. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll find another way. For all you aspiring researchers, and if you're into criminal justice or any of that, I'm going to tell you what they don't want you to know. Oh, when they say no, there's always a way to circumvent it. And I like to think I've become a master of it, because when I'm told no, it motivates me. That's my dark side coming out. So when you want to get materials to try to verify or confirm things he said, it's almost impossible when there is no public record of so and so that he says he killed in Atlanta. Okay, that makes it hard when there's no cold case on Georgia's website and the name probably isn't accurate. But when it's like California cases that they haven't tried, and I know damn well these people were killed by him, and California refuses to give me any of these old cases, I just find another way. So there's my rant too. Go ahead and
It's
tell me
funny you
no.
should mention Georgia, because I'm in Georgia and I know that pain.
Okay, so yeah, Georgia, I love Georgia, by the way, but they really need to put a better missing persons cold case, something. But okay, I'll play devil's advocate to law enforcement and the press across the nation in this regard. A lot of people that he killed were undocumented and or obviously in the drug underworld. So what their real name was, and if they were even listed, if they were found dead in the car, is, yeah, probably wasn't even reported to most of the press in the 1980s or 90s. Also, his memory is amazing, but he's even said there's some things he forgets. He's given me names of almost every single victim, but was that name accurate, or was it their alias? You know what I mean? So I understand even the police work and media trying to figure this out. It probably wasn't even available a lot of the time. Again, marginalized element, but yeah, like he said, how did I get away with it? Nobody gave, I'm quoting him, nobody cared about the Mexicans. And to an extent, he's right. And it doesn't help if they're undocumented and using an alias. Like, it probably doesn't make the blotter, I guess.
Right.
So it makes our job really hard when you're trying to confirm. You have all these other details, like month of July 1988. How come there's no listing of a body being found in a Chicago suburb? Did it really happen? I have to raise that question. Or did Jose mix up the years? So then you got to go look 87, 86, and 89, 90. Is there anything? There are some that I just noted in the manuscript. It's like, look, I hope one of you sleuths goes and figures this out, because this one I can't confirm or deny.
You know, it's crazy you mentioned that, because I don't know if you know the name Juan Corona, but he was killing migrant workers. When was it? In 1971, he was convicted of 25 of them, and they didn't catch on because a lot of them were illegal immigrants. And same thing with Gary Ridgway. I like to call them, I mean, no offense by this, but I mean, The Walking Dead, prostitutes. He killed so many prostitutes, and
I point this out, Andrew. It's just something I made a point of in the opening of the book. I didn't want to go into all the drug, the neoliberalism issue, why the cartels even created. There's other books on it, but what I did want to touch on, and I also didn't want to go too much into the cultural commentary, except the relevance of what you're saying. He may have not known it at the time. He may have. Later in life, he recognized, I got away with it because these people were in my drug underworld, largely, not all of them, and they were undocumented Mexican migrants, or, they were over here under aliases. There is fact to that makes solving a case very difficult when you don't know who they are. And it's the common thread I point out in the book. You can't compare apples and oranges, but if you want to take Manson, Gacy, the Green River Killer, whoever, they preyed on marginalized demographics. Okay, Manson a little different, but he knew he was preying on the wayward, lost hippie, whatever. They were moldable.
Right, high-risk victims for sure.
Yes. The Green River, we all know. Who did he go after? Prostitutes. Why? Because society, didn't care or cast them aside. Same with Gacy. He's going after, young men, hustlers that, society in the 70s looked down on. So again, it's not a social commentary, but it is like, hey, these factors are why somebody like this can get away with this for so long. Jose did this for 30 some years. Like, the average person's going to go, how the fuck did he not get caught? Well, he got caught for a lot of little shit, and he was suspected of a couple, but most of the big ones, he wasn't even on the radar. Because
right. And what got him caught was his temper.
Victim was. The victims were not on the radar either. Does that make sense? What I'm
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And would you say that his temper was what got him caught? Because if I'm not mistaken, he killed the guy because he called his daughter a whore or something like that, and or he parked his car in the driveway when he told him not to, or something like that.
Bitch. Okay, this isn't giving everything away, of the book, but I think I can make this connection because there's a lot in between. But he began his criminal career on vengeance and rage, and his career came to an abrupt end on vengeance and rage. Neither the first or the last killing had anything to do with his vocation. That, I think, for what it's worth, is of note. He began his career out of revenge, and his career came to an end out of revenge. Not either of those had anything to do with the work vocation killings. So I don't know if that's some kind of lesson in morality or karma or something. I don't know. Largely the guy killed and did enforcement work at the behest of drug trafficking. But when you get used to killing people for money, when you lose your temper, I guess it's easier to just kill a guy because he parks in your driveway, as one of the ones in the 1990s was. Guy parked in his driveway, told him not to. Guy parked in his driveway again. That's it. I'm taking him for a ride. So, yeah, temper got the best of him in the beginning, and temper got the best of him in the end.
What state is that in?
His first alleged killing was in Southern California. The one that got him arrested was in Alabama.
Gotcha. I have a question on TikTok, wanting to know where they can get a signed copy of your book.
Well, thank you for that. Okay, so the book on El Mano Negra, if they're asking about that or anyone wants to know, I'm literally doing the final tweaks on the manuscript before I turn it into my publisher. So hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, that book will be out, because I do get asked that a lot. Now, any of my other books that you'd be interested in, and my graphic novels, they are available on Amazon. Some of them on Barnes and Noble. And also I have copies, a couple of each that I could sign. Hit me up on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. Those are the ones I check the most. My handle is Gangland Legend, one word, on Instagram and Twitter. Facebook, Christian Cipollini, just find me and message me. But I read my DMs or whatever. If you follow or tag or ask the question, I'd be glad to let you know what books I have, if something you want, and I'd be glad to sign them and throw in some goodies. I like doing that. So
you said Land Legend.
Yeah, Gangland Legend, just one big word.
Okay, she was typing it in TikTok for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's my TikTok handle too. I forget though, because I apologize. I don't.
Yeah, I believe it is.
Much. Okay. I'm kind of new to the TikTok. That's my most recent endeavor. So
mine too, but it's so much fun.
Yeah, I guess it can be. A lot of people have reached out to me on there. I post like even just 2 seconds of something, I don't know, of interest to me, and people reaching out, and I'm like, oh wow, this is cool. So anyway.
Speaking about your books, I think it's the Lucky Luciano book I have, or it could be a different one, but Jose sent me your book, and almost every single page he has notes on it that he wrote about, like,
he sent you the copy of Diary of a Motor City Hitman. He gave you that one, and he sent me my copy of Lucky Luciano with all the white space annotated and drawings. That's right. I forgot he did
that's
that
one of my favorite things in my collection, because it's like this dude was literally taking notes on what you wrote, which I think is so funny. Like he's like a subjective reader, which I think was so cool.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because I want to tell you something. I put this in the book manuscript. I didn't want the book to be about me, but it ended up I'm in part of it. So something that when you introduced me to him shortly thereafter that really hooked me was when he wanted those copies of the books, remember? And I sent them. Not only did he send the Lucky book back filled with all his notes and drawings, I remember talking to him on the phone, and he quoted something out of that book. And as I write, it was so obscure that only someone who actually read the damn book would know that. And that he did that showed me he had an attention to detail, and he wasn't bullshitting. Yes, they can all bullshit, and all these guys will embellish and narcissism and all that, but it was really cool that he quoted something that I didn't even remember out of my own book. Like that, just I guess it added that human element that kind of won me over. I don't know, for what that's worth. It made a big deal.
Definitely a unique
and don't
specimen.
Ever get rid of that book. I have mine right
here.
No,
I won't.
That is my prized possession.
No, I won't. It's in my box of books. I need to get actually a bookshelf and put all my books on there, because I have a book signed by Dr. Michael Stone and Dr. Gary Bricado and so many forensic psychologists and different serial killers and stuff, and that's by far my favorite book that I own in my collection. It's like I'm never getting rid of that unless somebody pries it from my dead cold hands.
It's the same with mine. I don't even show it to people. I'm like afraid to take it out. But I have to sometimes, because there's so many quotes he wrote in there. I'm like, oh, I have to put this in the manuscript. Like, here's what he wrote on page 112.
Right. Sometime I'll have to take a picture of every single page and drop it into Google Drive just so you can see everything.
Yeah. I should do that with this. I gotta scan all this or whatever. But yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry, we just went down a rabbit hole, but that was fun.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. So I know we've been on here for almost 2 hours, so we can round out with again, you can talk about anything you have going on. I know you mentioned you can get the books on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles from you directly. Is there anything else you want to plug or talk about before we
I'll
get out
say
of here?
this and thank you. I am so grateful for anyone that would love a signed copy. To me, it makes me giddy like a kid again. I love doing that. But I had a website, but I took it down like a year ago to rebuild. So I'm sorry I don't have a straight up website until I'm happy with it. But if you follow me or go to my Instagram, you can see my link tree and everything's on there. But I am pretty proud of this. If any of you are interested, I also wrote and co-produced a documentary film that came out on Amazon and Tubi late last year. Dope Men, America's First Drug Cartel, which is really about a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier, how all these kind of famous and not so famous gangsters were the predecessors setting up drug smuggling routes. I know nobody thinks the mob did it back then. Oh, yes, they did. So Seth Ferranti and I and a great team of people put together this film. It's on Amazon Prime and Tubi. I'm really proud of that. So please check it out and let me know your thoughts. It's only like an hour long, but it's volume 1. Also, my graphic novel on Lucky Luciano. Really proud of that. Came out last year. It's all the issues, individual issues in one version. It's expensive. I'm sorry, but it's hardcover and it's really cool. I have a couple copies here if somebody wants to sign one. Other than that, the El Mano Negra memoirs will be published basically in their entirety, along with all the other research parts of it in a very visual book. Hopefully by the end of the year, if not first quarter of next year. My editor's chomping at the bit for it, and I'm trying to put in the last forensic pieces that I managed to get my hands on. So that's what's going on.
And do you do any kind of conventions? I'm sorry. I said, do you do any kind of conventions or anything like that might be coming up?
I did pre-COVID. God, I felt like I was doing all kinds. I haven't done much lately, and I hope some of these should invite me to some, or maybe I should research it more. I was going to a lot. COVID. What's that?
Just invite yourself.
I know. Maybe I should. Like, wait a second. Like, some of these things, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I got a little cocky. Like, oh, why have they not invited me? Like, but I did do a lot before that stupid COVID happened. And then after COVID, I ended up doing more television shows. Like, my agent was getting me a lot of gigs for documentaries. So yeah, if you're up late at night watching all these, crime and organized crime shows, don't be surprised if you see me. I did a lot of that. What's that?
Somebody said that in the comments. They said your TV shows.
Oh yeah. There's. I am proud. It's like the little kid in me. Hey, I want to be an expert at something, anything, and be on TV, and it ended up happening. So I guess dreams come true. But yeah, I love doing that because I love talking about this, but educating and being a part of that. I would love to do straight up book signings and conventions again. I talked to some of my colleagues and friends, and we're trying to. I was at the Mob Museum in December. We premiered Dope Men, but we really didn't do a signing. It was sort of short notice, and we showed the film and did a Q&A with the audience and stuff. But I miss it. Sorry, I'm rambling because now it's making me really think. I miss doing like book signings and meet and greets. I'm hoping at least when the Mano Negra book comes out that I'll be around more, all over the country type of thing for anybody that's interested.
We have a book festival here in Georgia, the Decatur Book Festival, and I think it happens in October now. It was on Labor Day weekend, but it was competing with Dragon Con, and so it it basically just ended up losing out. But it is always so much fun to go to, and I love meeting all the authors, and they have some of them set up to where you can do readings and stuff like that.
I would love to. Yeah, that I missed that too. I used to be able to do some readings with some of my colleagues, even in different industries. Like I would go to these conventions and it was crazy, great crossover. I miss doing that, and I'd love to come to Decatur. By the way, side note, yeah, that last killing before he got convicted, yeah, it was near Decatur actually. No, he in the book, I think, killed somebody near there or was through there talking about it. I'm sorry, there's so much information in my head right now. I feel like my ADHD is like going crazy. I apologize, but Decatur's mentioned. I'll just leave it at that.
By the way, you have a review here said Dope Men was good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope it's not perfect. And we only had like an hour to jam 6 years worth of research into it. So a lot of stuff, anyone who knows about documentary filmmaking, a lot of stuff gets cut that you wish wasn't, but it is the constraints, and welcome to Hollywood.
And I will say, anybody that's into organized crime and comic books, that's nerdy, Christian does have comic books that revolve around organized crime, which are pretty dope.
Yeah, true. The true story. Yeah. Lucky Luciano, for those who know me, he's got a special place in my world. And yeah, I dedicated a book and a complimentary comic book series to try to flesh out the real story and the nuances of it. That's the whole thing. You can't take anything at face value. I always say, here, kids, here's my lesson. There are 3 sides to every story, and the truth is usually somewhere in the murky middle, and it's our job to, I don't know, at least get close to finding it. We may not always find it, but get on the right track. So that kind of motivates me, and that's what I did with the comic books. Plus, they're fun.
Nice.
Yeah, I love comic books.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of that too. I don't know. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I'm trying to find my way.
Same.
I'll figure it
Never
out in my
grow
50s.
old. But well, I'm sorry.
Figure it out in my 50s.
Yeah, hey, believe me, I'm right there. I gotcha. I'm not so sure I'm going to find out then either. But
I don't know. I'm only a year and a half away, so.
You know what? It's who was that? Peter Pan, the one that never grew up. Is that I got the right story there?
Yep, Peter Pan.
Yeah, whatever. Maybe we should just all be like that.
That works for me.
Yeah. Anyway, hey, I want to say, if I hadn't said it already, I really appreciate all of you for having this, and I want to thank everybody who tuned in on whatever medium. I really appreciate it. I hope it was entertaining or interesting or something.
Oh yeah, it definitely was interesting. I always tell Amy and Jen this, and they probably are going to hate me for this, but this is probably one of the best interviews we've done yet. I say that every single time because it gets better and better and better.
It does. It does.
Well, then I hope the next guest blows this out of the water. Then that's what that's all good. I really do appreciate that. I get cocky's my alter ego, but the little kid in me is that humble one that's just grateful anybody gives a shit, so I really am very grateful that you guys do this, and that everybody tuned in.
Awesome. Well, we can wrap there unless Amy or Jen, you have anything else you want to add or ask?
No, I'm good.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Good night, y'all.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Christian. I'm definitely going to reach out to Jose again, whether he wants me to or not. I'm just going to extend a helping hand, so to speak.
But extend the olive branch. He'll be cool. I got to talk to him. But if you don't hear from him, it's probably because he's in lockdown. I swear they lock them down every other week, and I won't hear from him for weeks, and then he'll call me out of the blue. It's that prison. Yeah, a lot goes on. So have patience. All right.
Oh yeah. I'm totally used to the feds. Like I've been trying to do an interview with the dude for 2 years now, and he hasn't been able to call. Like when he gets a cell phone, that's the only time he can call.
Yep, it's insane. But again, thank you all. You guys have a great evening. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. We'll
Thanks,
we'll be in
Tom.
touch and we'll do this again soon. Okay.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.